So far, we've taken a look at two components of the aggregate expenditures model, consumption and investment. What do these look like graphically when we plot them on the Cartesian plane? That's going to be the big idea within this section. So here, we take a look at two big graphs that we have right here. A lot of different lines, but we want to focus in on graph A first. So here, this top graph right here, in order to introduce the idea of consumption, investment, and our aggregate expenditures, and see exactly where our macroeconomic equilibrium is going to be. So here, because we only include two variables, this is known as a simple aggregate expenditures model. And a lot of the things that we've talked about already are still going to hold true when we take a look at the simple aggregate expenditures model. On the left-hand side, we have aggregate expenditures, and on the top graph on the horizontal axis we have income. So here, spending components on the left hand side, income on the horizontal axis. So once again, we're getting that relationship. First, let's focus in on this black line. So this black line, once again, it intersects the intersects the origin. It's a 45-degree line reference. It tells us that income equals aggregate expenditures. So Y equals to AE. All the income within the economy has to equal all the spending. So that sounds something very familiar, doesn't it? So here, Y equals to AE, and in order for us to have any semblance of equilibrium at all, we need to be intersecting this line right here. So here, first thing that we want to note, this first line right here is the black line, which is a 45-degree line reference. So this black line, 45-degree line, 45-degree line. And remember, this is our reference or benchmark line. So reference line. One of these days I'm going to learn how to spell correctly. So 45-degree line, it's our reference line. It's where all income equals spending. So here exactly, Y equals to AE. So here, income equals to all the spending. Once again, in order for us to have equilibrium, we need to be intersecting this black line. Second line that we can focus in on is going to be our consumption line. So this red line right here, we already talked about this when we brought up the consumption function, so nothing new. So here, points to the left of A, that's going to be negative savings. Points to the right of A, that's positive savings. At this intersection, there is zero savings because there is $4,000 of consumption, $4,000 of income. So here, if consumption were the only variable within this entire model, point A would be seen as our equilibrium. But as we're going to see, point A is no longer going to be our equilibrium because we're adding in one more variable, which is investment. So remember, just as a review, this red line right here, consumption, this is going to be the actual consumption within the economy. So here, red line, we notice that this is actual consumption. Actual consumption. So red line, actual consumption. Black line is our 45-degree line. And then we need to add in one more line, which is going to be the yellow line. And that's where the impact of investment comes in. So the yellow line, if we want to go ahead and take a look at on the slides right here, the yellow line is exactly going to be shifted parallel up by the amount of investment. Remember that investment is autonomous, or it is independent of income. So if we increase investment by, say, $500, that tells us that our line is going to shift up exactly by $500. So here, in this case, investment shifts up by $100, so the line shifts up parallelly by $100. So here, investment, because it has no relationship with income at all we need to do when we add an investment is shift up the line by the amount of investment. So here, in this case, our line goes from C all the way to this yellow line. It's shifted up by $100. So here, the yellow line is actual consumption. Actual, there's no C there, actual consumption plus actual investment. Actual investment. So here, what we want to focus in on is this yellow line because it includes both of the components that we've talked about so far, consumption and investment, and the sum of these two is our simple aggregate expenditures model so far. And in order for us to have equilibrium, we need to be intersecting our black line. So point E is our simple aggregate expenditures equilibrium. But we want to talk about exactly how we transition from point A all the way to point E in order for us to get this equilibrium. So here, this is exactly what we're going to do. So here we want to focus in on panel A. Panel A, which is the top graph. So top graph. And we're going to tie in panel B very, very shortly. So in panel A, suppose that the economy is operating at point A, just starting us off. So initially, Suppose economy is operating at point A. At point A. So at point A, what do we notice? At point A, this is where consumption is the only variable within our entire model. So we would be in equilibrium if consumption is the only variable. We notice that income is equal to $4,000. We also notice that aggregate expenditures, in this case consumption, is also equal to $4,000. So here, aggregate expenditures, 4,000, income equals to 4,000. We are intersecting this black line, so they have to equal one another. So we can exactly write these numbers down. We notice that aggregate expenditures is equal to 4,000. And because consumption is the only variable so far, consumption is also equal to 4,000. Here, we also notice that income is equal to 4,000. And everything would be hunky-dory within our entire economic model if consumption were the only variable that we talked about. However, it is not, because we're now adding in $100 of investment. So now add in $100 of investment. So when we add in $100 of investment into our model, we're now including our second component within the model. Where are we going to end up? Before we were operating at point A. When we add in $100 of investment, we're going to be above point A. So exactly $100 above point A. So when this change happens, when we add in $100 of investment, we shift up the consumption line by exactly the amount of investment, because remember, it's autonomous of income. So we go from point A to exactly to a point above A by the amount of investment. So when we increase investment by $100, what has changed and what has stayed the same? So we go from point A to this point right here where you see the sort of laser point. We notice that income has exactly remained the same. We still have $4,000 of income. But how much has our aggregate expenditures changed by? Remember, aggregate expenditures is the sum of consumption and investment. We noticed that consumption was equal to 4,000, but when we add in $100 of investment, our aggregate expenditures is now equal to $4,100. So aggregate expenditures, our spending has changed, but our income has not. It still remains the same at $4,000. So here, this change, aggregate expenditures equals to 4,100, but our income is still equal to $4,000. So these two numbers, they are no longer equal to one another, indicating that we are not intersecting our 45-degree line. We are no longer in equilibrium. At point A, we were in equilibrium, but when we add in a new variable, we are no longer in equilibrium. We've shifted from point A to a point above A, so we're exactly here right now. So how exactly do we move from this point right here all the way to our new equilibrium at point E? Well, there's an entire channel and mechanism that we can go ahead and talk about. So here we notice that aggregate expenditures is bigger than income. So there's more spending in the economy than there is income. So that tells us that there are more goods being demanded than there are being supplied. So here in this situation, we notice that AE, since AE is greater than income, spending is greater than income, there are more goods being demanded than supplied. Being demanded than supplied. So there's actually more demand than there is supply. So we're in some type of shortage. So if this is going to be the case, what would be in the best interest of firms and corporations to do? They notice that, hey, there's a lot of spending going on within the economy, but there's not enough supply to go around. Firms and corporations would be sort of behooved, they'd be sort of incentivized to go ahead and supply more in order to get rid of the shortage. And that's exactly what they would do. So it would be in the best interests, of businesses to produce more. So they want to get rid of the shortage right here. So they're going to go ahead and increase their production. However, in order to increase their production, what do they need more of? They need more raw materials. They need more labor as well. So as they want to produce more, they hire more workers. So it would be in the best interest of businesses to produce more. So that tells us that they're going to hire more workers. Hire more workers. And as they hire more workers, more employees, this is going to cause what to incomes? It's going to push up incomes. Anytime there's higher demand for labor, for more workers, incomes should rise as well. So here, which causes incomes to rise. And how much are incomes going to rise? They're going to keep on rising until we reach our equilibrium. That's the simplest thing that we can say. So here, hire more workers, which causes incomes to rise until equilibrium is reached. Until equilibrium is reached at point E. At point E. So exactly where our new model line intersects our 45-degree line reference. So let's go ahead and see in transition, what the methodology, what the channels are laid out so far. So we started off at point A right here. We said that, hey, aggregate expenditures, 4,000, equals our income, 4,000, so we were happy. However, this is not our equilibrium because it hasn't included all of our macroeconomic variables. When we include investment, $100 of investment, we move out of equilibrium to a point above A. We have $4,100 of aggregate expenditures or spending, but still $4,000 of income. Because these two numbers are not equal, we are not in equilibrium. However, because spending is greater than income, we notice that there is more spending than income. There are more goods being demanded than there are being supplied. So it's going to be in the best interest of firms and corporations to ramp up their production and hire more workers. As they hire more workers, we notice that incomes start to rise as well, and they're going to keep on rising until we hit point E. And at point E, this is where our model line now intersects the 45-degree line reference. And what do we notice about expenditures and income? We notice that aggregate expenditures equals to $4,400 and income equals to $4,400 as well. So we are in equilibrium. So Y equals to 4,400, and aggregate expenditures also equals to 4,400 as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we get these specific numbers in the next videos, but just for now, know exactly that these two are equal to one another, so we are in equilibrium. And of course, the opposite does hold true if aggregate expenditures is less than income. So what happens if this is the case? Aggregate expenditures is less than income. How exactly do we get back to our equilibrium? So in this case, we're actually on this portion of the sort of model line right now. So here we go from point A. This is really our new point A. We'd be up here. And in this case, we notice that, hey, our income is greater than spending. So it'd be in the best interest of firms and corporations to actually slow down their production, fire workers. And as they fire workers, incomes are going to decrease until once again, we hit point E right here. So essentially, the methodology and channels that we've talked about right here in this little paragraph, the opposite is still going to hold true, but the opposite just occurs. So opposite occurs. So something to be aware about. So like in economics, as we brought up so many times, what you do to one side, you can obviously do to the other side in order to get what happens there. So with all of this, we bring up about our first condition for simple macroeconomic equilibrium. So this is what we're going to be building up to. So simple macroeconomic economic equilibrium. So condition one, in order for us to have macroeconomic equilibrium, comes from panel A. It's where Y equals to aggregate expenditures. So here, graph A. And that's everything that we laid out so far. So if we notice that income does not equal aggregate expenditures, we are not in equilibrium. Both of these conditions are going to have to hold true. The second condition is going to come from graph B, the bottom graph, and this is going to be the simpler one out of these two. On the bottom graph, we notice that we have saving and investment on the vertical axis, but still income from before, income on the horizontal axis. We start off at point A. This is where we only had consumption within our model. And at point A, remember, we are consuming exactly what we have in income, so there are zero savings. So at point A, we have $4,000 of income, but zero savings. However, as we transition from a point above A all the way to point E, we do the same thing on the bottom graph right here. As we add in investment, we have $100 of investment, but zero savings. And as we move all the way over to point E right here, we notice that, hey, savings is exactly equal to investment. Remember, as we move from point A over to point E is to the right of A. And points to the right of A, we said that there were going to be positive savings. And that's where we see this coming true as well. So here we had zero savings, but as we shift over to point E, we now have positive savings. And how much savings do we have? It's going to be exactly the amount of investment that we have. So savings have to equal investment. The amount of investment that takes place within the economy has to be exactly matched by how much savings there is as well. And that's going to be our second condition for macroeconomic equilibrium, where savings equals to investment. And that's where graph B comes into play. So both of these conditions need to be met in order for us to have any semblance of equilibrium at all. If neither one of these conditions are met, or if only one of these conditions are met, we don't have equilibrium because both of these have to be true at the same exact time. So here we worked with this entire sort of transition as we go from point A to a point above A all the way to E. The same idea holds true within graph B right here. Zero savings, hey, we actually have some investment now, but as we shift over from point A over to point E, we notice that, hey, we're to the right of A, so therefore there are going to be positive savings. So at point E, savings equals investment as well. So that leads us to this condition for macroeconomic equilibrium. I equals to S. There's no reason for the economy to change its level or output or income. Everything is going to be hunky-dory at point E right here. So know this transition. The transition is going to be very important because it tells us exactly how we shift from point A to point E, exactly what happens when we add in more variables into our aggregate expenditures model. And with all of this, one thing that I'm going to leave you guys to sort of ponder just a little bit is when we shifted from point A to point E, we added in $100 of investment. And you notice that our ending point had us having $4,400 of aggregate expenditures and $4,400 of income. So how did a $100 increase in investment cause a $400 change in spending and income? And that's going to be a very big portion of what we need to go ahead and take a look at in the next few videos as well. It's something known as the multiplier effect, and it's something that is very prevalent within macroeconomics. So here, basically, simple aggregate expenditures model and the transitions and the mechanisms behind it when we only include consumption and investment. We'll take a look at the multiplier effect in the next few videos. I'll see you guys there.